Hello, welcome. My name's Phil Storer. We're bringing you a webinar today. It's brought to you by IPP. IPP is a pooler, but it happens to be one of the operators of a best example of a circular economy system. And today we're going to talk about the role of IoT in the supply chain and the role it might play in the future. We brought together three specialists. They are going to tell you the context of what's happening in the supply chain. They're going to delve into how the tech works and how it can help you. And finally, we're going to look at some really interesting use cases. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Ron Martinek. Ron is a partner from PwC. He specializes in digital transformation. Ron.
Thank you, Phil. Let's discuss connected supply chains. So let's make a step back and discuss how are supply chains now running. And maybe what we've learned from the pandemic is that supply chains are vulnerable. I have an example of a customer who is in a retailer, and as a shopper, you are able to shop online, and that is going great. But after that, at the pickup store, you need to stand in a queue for 10 minutes. So that's not a shopping experience nowadays people are expecting. And that has impacted the supply chain as well. So the supply chain is this moment vulnerable. And not only around the pandemic, but because we see some tension in the economic. We have seen some price and tariffs increasing developments. So the supply chain being vulnerable means that we need to work on a solution for that. And we really, as companies, we need to make sure that the supply chain is getting more and more transparent and is getting more and more transparent and resilient to make sure that the supply chain is flexible. And as a company, you are not doing that alone. You need to have other stakeholders in the supply chain to make sure that your supply chain is that resilient. And what we have learned nowadays, that real digital champions in the supply chain are able to make a connected supply chain. Connected supply chain means that they are able to connect all different stakeholders within the supply chain, from vendor to customer to warehouses, to make sure that it's transparent and you can make sure that the stocks and the order flows are monitored real time. And how do we do that? What we see in practice, there are three ways. Collect data, connect data, and put intelligence to it. What I mean with collecting data is we see a lot of sensor-driven automation at this moment. Material which are being sensorized and making sure that measure is monitored, dwell times are monitored, track and trace, geolocations, etc., etc. Those data is connected to each other, not only within the company, but with all your stakeholders around the supply chain. And it makes really impact if you translate those connected data into business value. So imagine the intelligent tower that you as a company have an oversight over your supply chain and make sure that all the dots are connected and you are an orchestra within the supply chain. Those are real real use cases which digital champions are nowadays putting in practice. So those are really interesting developments in the future. But what we see nowadays still is a lot of legacy information, legacy systems throughout companies. Not all companies are connected, but we think that a connected supply chain with the drive of, for example, IoT and 5G internet will accelerate. But it has an impact. the connected supply chain. And what is the impact on you as an organization? One, you have to make sure that you are in relation with all your suppliers and other partners across the supply chain. Two, as just mentioned, data, data, data. Not only collecting data, but connecting it as well and make it intelligence, make it business value. And three, put yourself in the perspective of the consumer, because the client, and maybe the client of your client, will further dictate the supply chain. So make sure that you are aware of the behavior and the attitude of your consumers. And four, make your product smart. So validate where in the supply chain you can make your assets smart. And we see later on some examples of smart assets. Check where you can make sure that you are more efficient and more effective in the supply chain. So those four factors have impacted connected supply chain.
Fantastic, Ron. Thank you very much. Great insight into what's happening. Just a question, if I can.
Sure.
As an Englishman, I'm keenly aware that my plug doesn't fit into the socket in Europe, and I drive on the wrong side of the road, or some might say the right side of the road, actually. But how do you see the transition to connectivity so that we can have one true standard that everyone can work to?
Yeah, that's a 1 million question, Phil, to have one standard. Well, we see a lot of connectivity standards in the marketplace, but what we see that some, let's put them as a low power area network technology is coming in, like 5G. And my opinion is that 5G will be an accelerator for having more and more standards around connectivity. Of course, nowadays you see Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 4G, but those are not efficient in terms of power and not efficient in terms of costs. So you need to have, at the end, one, let's say, standard to make sure that you have the connectivity there. And in the meantime, I think you will have a more mixed of connectivity there, and that's not a problem. But you need to make sure that you can scale up your assets on that. So that will be a challenge. So from the period where we are now to a full 5G or 6 or 7 or 8G world.
Fantastic. Sounds really interesting. Thank you. Well, now we're going to move on to look at the technology behind this. So we've seen the context of the supply chain, and I'm going to introduce you to a gentleman. I met Davey, gosh, 3 years ago now, and Davey came to talk to us about what the capability was to begin to connect our pallets and boxes in the context of a connected supply chain. And actually he convinced us so well that we formed a JV with Davey's business, and that JV is called Connected Load Carrier. We're proud to work with Davey still to this day, and actually we're doing some really smart things. So, Davey Bars from Connected Load Carrier, please explain to us the technology behind the connectivity.
I'm representing CLC, Connected Load Carrier today. We made a shorter version of it called CLC, you will hear it more often. Who is CLC and what can we do for you? First we start with who we are. It's a company that is founded by two partners. One of them is Faber Halbertsma Group and the other one is Dutch IT Solutions. We combine our strengths by the vast experience of the Faber Halbertsma Group within the logistical ecosystem, and Dutch IT Solutions, which is building a portfolio in the Internet of Things. Both companies share a vision where we make a sustainable and contribution to the logistical ecosystem by connecting both worlds, as well the physical as the digital world. What can we achieve? What can we achieve together, and what can we do for you? CLC is a company that can supply a full end-to-end IoT solution, and we often do this as a recurring service to make your load carriers connected. Why do we do this as a recurring service? Because we want to guarantee a working IoT solution. IoT means more than only supplying an IoT sensor, but it also involves connectivity. As Ron also explained earlier, there are multiple ways to connect your IoT devices, and it's not yet standardized in the market. There are many choices to be made, and we help to make these choices if it comes down to IoT and your specific use case. Besides this, we also help you with data visualization and data handling, because the end result is never only an IoT sensor. It's also what do you do with the data that's collected. And of course, how does your organization work with IoT? We need some training, do you need support, how do you install the modules, is all subjects to think about. Of course, we are there to service and support at the end and help you make it successful. Let's zoom in to the modules itself and the specifications and the features that we can supply you with. One of the things that we create are our IoT modules. Our IoT modules meet the latest technological standards in the market, and we achieve this by collaborating with manufacturers of components and chips to give you a step ahead of the competitors. With this collaboration, we have the latest insights on what is technologically possible, and of course combining this with an in-house development team for as well IoT hardware as well the visualization and creating the data algorithms ourselves. To give you some examples of the specifications of our devices, we want to talk about the positioning, which can range from up to 100 meters down to several meters depending on your use case and your type of assets and the load carriers you want to make connected. Think about battery life. We have an extensive battery life, but also keep in mind the dimensions that are the constraint, often the constraint within load carriers. We have developed a parameterized movement detection algorithm which we can adapt based on different use cases and different types of assets. The rugged and weatherproofness of our IoT modules is very important because assets are often outside or in low temperatures, or you can imagine what can happen there. Over-the-air updates of configuration and firmware are most important to also make you future-proof and help you evolve in this growing IoT and data collection purpose. And we offer global connectivity via strong partnerships in the field. If we talk about features, and I said it before, is that an IoT module itself is not the purpose. It's what can we do? How can we create business value with our IoT modules? How can we reduce cost? And this is what we want to achieve with IoT modules, and where we have a conversation about with our customers, and often we call them partners afterwards when we are in the process together. Let me take you by the hand and show you some examples that we already have achieved here. It's accurate positioning, which can save time, even can save people. We can help with enhanced traceability to acquire the same results in a business, but with less assets. Automatic linking of your IoT or enabled asset to a location, think about a customer or a competitor, can give a huge advantage on your processes or your operations. Optimizing flows and workflows when you can detect if assets are loaded or unloaded at a certain point and speed up things. Think about insurance cases with crash detection or anti-tampering. Or There are many possibilities here. The environmental data can give you assurance on product quality and process optimization. So we are happy to have this conversation together where we can create business value together. Out of experience, we have out of doing real use cases with our customers, we have created some solutions, and we combined all the services we can offer into what we call predefined configurations. And I want to take you by the hand to 3 of the examples of products we already created here. And one of them is the connected pallet. The benefit of the connected pallet are to reduce loss of assets. We are less dependent on customer dispatch information, and we can enhance turnover speeds. One of the others is the connected display unit, which is totally created to optimize and create marketing efficiency. The third one is the connected construction container, which we can use to do real-time inventory management of all our assets in the field. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Davey. I like the fact that in your presentation you went from the technology more towards real-world examples. And I can imagine there are many people sitting, listening to this or looking at it, actually supply chain professionals, technology professionals, who say, it's kind of interesting, but I've heard some of it before. We've heard the context that connected supply chains actually are the future. And it might not be on your agenda today, or it might not even be on your agenda tomorrow or next month. But for sure, it's on the agenda of your CEO. They're thinking way ahead about what their supply chain can be. We thought next it would be really, really good to actually bring this into real life. And I'd like to introduce a gentleman who actually has lived this in real life now for quite some time. And he's going to give us some real life examples of how this works and the benefit that can be derived from it. So I'd like to introduce you now to Eric Schrover from IPP. Eric, over to you.
Well, thank you, Phil. User cases. I think very good to explain today. We are upscaling 3 proof of concepts. The first one is about tracking and monitoring containers, which is with RD4, a waste collection and recycling company. But also with tracking and monitoring of pallets, which is with Altrad and IPP. A industrial company, Altrad, and a pooler, FMCG. All 3 projects are currently focusing on tracking and tracing of load carriers throughout the supply chain. There are, of course, more projects upcoming, but those 3 are really in a state of, let's say, upscaling at the moment, because we are working on this project together with Connected Load Carrier for more than a year now. On digitalization of load carriers, we as IPP, besides the investment done in Connected Load Carrier, we also worked with the market, with retail, with industry, and with GS1 in Germany to develop a smart box, a digital foldable, collapsible box in the supply chain. First of all, to reduce packaging material, card box. Secondly, to improve productivity, but most important also to make the supply chain more transparent. And also as such, to make the administrative burden more easy to work with. And that's also currently in the field in Germany and also in an upscaling modus. Maybe lessons learned internally, because doing a project like this is not easy. Putting a tracker on a pallet or putting a tracker on a load carrier, well, that's not the most hardest part. But during the projects which we are running today, we were focusing on mostly 3 elements. First of all, the positioning. When you have different collection points in the same area, it becomes a challenge, at least, to really connect the load carrier to the right location. So it really needs a lot of intelligence on the data, but also intelligence on the IoT device, really to make sure that the right asset is connected to the right location. Battery life, well, a challenge in itself. If you look throughout the seasonality in the year, sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold, and that affects the battery life of the tracker. So in this project, and also the lessons we learned, a lot of investigations has been done in choosing the right battery to make it work, to have at least a couple of years battery life to track an asset. Robustness, really acting in a real life environment is also funny to look at, because basically we thought we were there, but when we started to upscale this project, suddenly we lost trackers and we were thinking, what is possible? What went wrong? But actually what went wrong was really easy. In the production or the repair centers, they started to connect this load carrier to the load, or the IoT device to the load carrier, but in such a way they just nailed the tracker completely to the load carrier and through the IoT device. And then we lost the IoT device. And it sounds crazy and it sounds like easy, but it's the lessons learned when you start investing in these technologies. So from an operational point of view, from a location point of view, but also from a lifetime point of view. Lessons learned with our customers, more external. Well, you get a lot of data. And when you get this data, you suddenly feel like, wow, we see a lot of things happening in the supply chain. But like Ron already explained, what is the value for you? So what makes it for you interesting to see? And that's what we learned as well in those 3 projects, is really to start small, really on just a couple of trackers, and start building this dashboard together with customers, really to see, what do you want to see? Do you want to see dwell time, rotation? Do you want to see locations? And do you want to see if a tracker is in a blacklist location or a whitelist location? So those kind of things are, let's say, in progress when you start a project like that. But believe me, you need to start small, because before you know it, you end up with big data, and then you lost a little bit, you lose track of the value of the assets. In the end, we strongly believe in the connectivity of load carriers. Focusing today on traceability, really tracking and monitoring load carriers throughout the supply chain, making really a transparent ecosystem over different kinds of individual companies. That's our main focus. But of course, there's a lot of more possible, like Davey already explained. And I think you see already some features on the slides. So you can expect more from us. So to be expected. Thank you very much, Phil.
Erik, a question from my side. What we see nowadays, digital champions are using data for making the supply chain not only transparent in ways of making it more effectively or efficient, but using the data to making more impact for environmental or societal. They are not using the data only for making the supply chain transparent in terms of effectively and efficient supply chain, but to make impact on societal and environmental issues as well. What's your reflection on that from EPP perspective?
Yeah, a good question. I think what we see with the data we have today, first of all, it's an optimization part. So really making different flows available for, let's say, others, for stakeholders, which they can optimize, for example, transport. What we also see is that we can indeed reduce, for example, the size of the pool. So really less assets needed for the full supply chain. But I think most important is the connection with the product in the end. So we are also working with some companies to see if we can connect the pallet, the load carrier, to the product, and then give some insights on, for example, the full supply chain, the temperature in this supply chain, but also the time the product is moving from factory to consumer. And that in itself can reduce waste as well. And there is a lot of waste in the supply chain. So it's about waste management, it's about optimization of supply chains in transport, but also utilizing pools in a more efficient way, really to reduce the number of assets, improve the volume which is being shipped with it. So yeah, it makes impact, carrying impact, as IPP does.
Ron, great question. I think it's easy to forget the sustainability and environmental impact of what we're talking about here. And Eric, thank you for your answer. It's time to wrap up this part of it, but I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts before we finish. Number one, this subject is absolutely on the agenda of your chief executives. It may not happen tomorrow, we know that, but the reality is we started off this webinar with a picture of an empty pallet. It was an empty pallet, by the way. It was a particularly fine pallet, I might add, but it wasn't really an empty pallet because it was a vessel for data and supply chain intelligence. And it could be your supply chain that we're talking about, and it was also a way of a signal, if you like, that this will be the start of the transformation digitally of supply chains. So we've gathered together 3 experts in this field, specialists, and we've heard the context of supply chains, of how digital connection is coming. And for sure it is. And you need to take part in it, we need to take part in it, and we also learn the technology behind it. And we also learn some interesting use cases and also some lessons about how we got to where we are today. But for sure, we can't ignore this. So once again, thanks guys for your time, truly appreciate it. Hopefully everyone thought that was insightful. The next part of the webinar is a Q&A. The Q&A is going to be via a chat function. So if you've got some questions for these guys, there are no dumb questions, by the way. If you've got some questions for these guys, get typing, we'll direct it to the most appropriate individual and we'll give you some answers. So guys, thank you for taking part today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with us. But also, please take the opportunity to participate and ask some questions. Thanks again.